Hey guys, today I want to talk with you about Abraham Lincoln. Not in a history class style, not that kind of video. It's not going to be a top 10 facts, all the things you already know about Lincoln. I really want to bring him back down from this stratosphere, this mythical framework that we always think about him in. I want to explore the human being he was, because I think we can forget that not so long ago he walked this very earth and saw the same moon and stars as we all do. And the fact is, if we set aside all the politics of his day, we're left with really the bare bones of it is a human being that came into existence just like us and was faced with certain situations and acted in certain ways. So this video, I really want to explore what character he embodied throughout his life. Before I do so, I want to just pay a ton of credit to Doris Kearns Goodwin for her incredible book called Team of Rivals, and it's about Lincoln's presidency and some of his earlier life. One last thing as well is that I want to mention that I'm not a Lincoln scholar, but I've tried to remain as true to Lincoln as I possibly could have. So number one, ambition and drive. Basically, Lincoln was born into very unfortunate circumstances. He grew up on a log farm with a small family. His parents were both illiterate, and the whole community were very content with living a hand-to-mouth existence, or better put, they didn't know that there was anything else possible for them. Yet Lincoln had this self-consciousness of these capacities and drives within him to expand, and this ambitiousness that wasn't commonly around him. His life force, the very life force of Lincoln, was an urge to flourish. And he basically just thought about his life in a heroic sense. And I think he developed this ambition via two key ways. The first was a low self-esteem, essentially. Wasn't very proud, was actually in fact ashamed with his lack of education, his lack of privilege, and he very much wanted to achieve something great with his life, and as he put it himself, earn the esteem of his fellow man by doing something worthy of their esteem. So in a sense, he really just wanted to fill this inner void with a beautiful, grand existence. And the second is actually related to trait number two, which is love. His drive to live a grand existence was really, in another sense, to be a force of love for its own sake, an expression of love in his very life force. And I don't really mean a romantic sense of love or a love in a common sense. I'm really talking about a higher ideal or a virtuous, noble notion of love. This life force that moves and stirs the world on a higher plane. And it's very much for Lincoln was also interconnected with the notions of goodness and justice and benevolence. For example, in 1855 when he ran for the Senate and had to secure 61 votes and managed to acquire 57 of them. So he was 4 votes shy from finally securing a seat in high political office. But he couldn't quite get the other votes. And so instead he sacrificed his position and his chance at success in that political race and told his voters to vote for someone else because that other person was still supporting the greater cause that he was so lovingly a part of and driven by and wanted to see come into its full fruition. So that ability to sacrifice his own personal agenda is just a powerful sign that he was driven by something higher. Now we come to trait 3, which was compassion. And this is kind of a branch of love as I look at it, but in a more common, practical, everyday, interpersonal sense. So you've got things like empathy, tolerance, selflessness, magnanimity, kindness, goodwill, etc. Those kind of more common traits, but I've used compassion as an umbrella term for this. And I think he developed these traits because of his intimate connection with tragedy. He witnessed his mum pass away at the age of 9 and had to bury her outside of their cabin and walk past the grave all the time. And then his sister passed away in childbirth when he was 19. Following that, in his mid-20s, the first love of his life, Anne Rutledge, also passed away when an illness swept the town. And not to mention his strained, emotionally unfulfilling relationship with his father, who really became his only family at one point in his life, and he wasn't able to get that emotional support and encouragement from his father, which had to have been extremely difficult for him. So he had this just breadth of suffering that was always appearing, and it was sort of interwoven in his very existence, and hence why a lot of people said that he had this melancholic temperament. But it was from this suffering that he really learnt about the fragility of life. And I think it lessened his ego. He no longer had this selfishness and this need to have everything about himself. This was also really about his ability to understand that, you know, people have been through such pain and such suffering, and they can leave these deep emotional wounds and scars on their psyche, and that you don't really know what a person's been through. And so it's best to take the higher ground and to show compassion and understanding, and at least attempt to put yourself in their shoes before you lash out and retaliate. One great example in the book is when he was dealing with Chase, Selman Chase, and Chase was on his cabinet. And basically one day during the second year of the war, Chase read the newspaper out of the New York Times, which basically blamed the president for the way things were. And so Chase said, there's too much truth in this. And that kind of insubordination and criticism and insult of Chase to Lincoln was in every case warranting an outcry of indignation from Lincoln. But Lincoln was able to just let the insult pass through him and understand that Chase himself was dealing with a lot and had this neurotic need to be in power, and have a personal example that actually reminded me of this kind of situation that happened not too long ago. And I was working in my job and I made a mistake, and my boss put his finger up in my face and started yelling at me. He just began insulting me, and I thought immediately about how Lincoln would handle this. Instead of retaliating and being provoked, let all of the anger and rage literally pass through me, and I appeased him and was able to have that inner sense of worth. And I relied on my own opinions of myself and said, none of this is true. It's just a single mistake that I won't make again. And I understand that this person is really struggling in their life, and they're, in a sense, broken in many ways, as far as I could tell. And so I didn't let it escalate further than that. But also without letting him walk all over me. So that's a fine line it's difficult to logically understand, something you have to feel is right. So trait number 4 was his social intelligence. Lincoln basically had this keen understanding of human motivation, closely connected to his compassion, no doubt, and his ability to take himself out of his own perspective. And in so doing, he'd learned what really made other people tick and what they really wanted. There's a great example in the book where basically the war was coming to an end, and on the Union side, on Lincoln's side, there were people that were very adamant that the war was about ending slavery, and on another side were more about making peace, and if slavery had to remain, that was worth it. People wanted to know, were there peace commissioners in Washington? Using his social intelligence and finesse of language, Lincoln said, as far as he was aware, there are no peace commissioners in Washington. And of course the truth was, there were peace commissioners, but they hadn't entered in the state borders yet of their trip. Both parties took this as a sign that their side was still upheld. And of course Lincoln himself, who really wanted both results, also was able to keep his own greater mission on track. And that was just his keen understanding of how to find this middle ground through his understanding of people. Trait number 5 was Lincoln's wisdom. Now, what really is wisdom? Well, I really define it as this awareness of the patterns of life over time and finding out these patterns and how they unfold. And so he basically had this deeper lens with which he observed the very unfolding and nature of life. For example, Lincoln loved using this metaphor of a tree with fruit that ripens, and most of it's a waiting game. So there's a lot of patience. And when the fruit is ripe, you pluck it. But most people are tempted to grab it too soon or too late. And we also know that he held a fatalistic philosophy without really knowing the exact details of that. But for those of you that don't know, fatalism basically is the philosophy that everything that is meant to unfold is to unfold, and there's nothing really that we can do to change that. So to a less philosophic mind, that might seem like a really negative and disempowering belief to hold. So how did Lincoln have such an ambitious drive and yet believe that everything was already determined? And I think, again, goes into Lincoln's just this emotional intelligence in his character to intuitively find that middle ground, to accept and hold such a disempowering belief, or at least seemingly on the surface, and yet be able to empower his own meaning in life. It requires introspection and just this penchant for getting to the root cause and really grounding yourself in deeper truths that you find are right for you. Number 6, closely related, I've called curiosity/intelligence. Lincoln also had a very logical, analytical, rational mind, weighing up the strengths and weaknesses and finding solutions, and he was grounded in reality in that sense. I think again that this curiosity was twofold. One, it was a curiosity for its own sake. As it said in the book, life to Lincoln was like a school. He was just fascinated about the world and finding out as much as he could and getting his hand on as many books as he could, with his eyes sparkling with excitement as he was transported into these distant worlds way beyond his tiny farm frontier. But then there was, again, I think, this void within him, and he was so compelled to use his intelligence to navigate and understand and comprehend the external world that he basically used his curiosity to feel at home in reality, so he could stop floundering and feeling so insecure and set himself on the best course and the best path he possibly could have to actualize his loving ambitions. The next trait, which is charisma. And I don't mean charisma in sort of a Hollywood sense of being idolized and being able to melt people's hearts with their words and humor and things like that, although I guess some of that is a little bit true about Lincoln. But I really mean this warmth of personality and this fun lightheartedness and geniality that he was able to bring into situations. For example, there'd be cabinet meetings on intense topics about the war, and he'd be so invested and serious in that. And then, with a click of a finger, he'd be able to detach and tell a joke or a funny story with an incredible moral truth always at the point of it. I think for Lincoln, it was the case that this lightheartedness was essential to his deeper philosophies about life. I mean, if you're a fatalist like Lincoln appears to be, and you believe that life is this uncontrollable unfolding of events, you kind of get this humor in the absurdity of that notion and the importance to let go of such seriousness and to embrace the silly side of life. This warmth made others feel good, and I think Lincoln also loved drawing other people into this positive orbit of control and dignity and yet humor and authenticity. And then I think, of course, it just helped him. I mean, we know he was very sad in various times during his life, and I think having a laugh just really helped to in a practical sense, give him respite from his presidential responsibilities. I love embracing more of that in my own life and just letting go of the seriousness as I face challenges and new opportunities and change and growth. Just always maintaining that understanding that life is a fleeting dance where we're just caught up in it and we do the best we can, and it will all be over very soon. And one day someone may be talking about various things that have happened around the world, various events and people, in the exact same way I'm talking about Lincoln to you. And finally, the last trait is perseverance. Lincoln experienced so much turmoil and struggle in his life. When he wasn't Abraham Lincoln the president, and he's merely Abraham Lincoln, a young man with the whole world ahead of him, and in this present moment, and having no idea where he's really going in life, he really had this persistence. As Doris Kearns Goodwin puts it in the book, his whole journey really was akin to a Herculean feat of self-creation. He just never gave up, and he continued through so many bouts of melancholy. He weathered many of those emotional storms, not to mention the deaths, the political defeats, and all of the trials and tribulations of his marriage and his everyday life. He never could give up on his ambition to be remembered and make an impact in a positive, loving way. So those are the traits that I think really define Lincoln's character. And when you add them together, you get someone that has an incredible breadth of wisdom, emotional strength, and groundedness that can weather the many storms of life and lead people, as well as himself, to a positive trajectory and future. And of course, that's what he ultimately did. Now, if you have enjoyed this video, I would really love it if you'd subscribe. Leave me a comment on what you'd like to see in terms of next videos, perhaps new biographies or people for me to cover that you find inspiring. Let me know, and I might actually research and shoot another video on them. I'm really shooting these videos because I think we need to have more high quality discussion about life and how to live an amazing life and tap into the things that are most important to you in your character, in your goals, in your values, and in your own dreams and ambitions and visions. And really just getting down to how to live a successful, fulfilling, a happy life. And not on a surface level, but in a really practical and deep sense. That's what this channel's about. So if you like the sound of that and you'd love to see more videos, please subscribe and also check out my website. Finally, I encourage you to get the book Team of Rivals. I've got an Amazon link below if that interests you. It's a really incredible book and it will be very impactful on your life. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.